What's up, y'all?
Hi, boners.
Hey, welcome to the About podcast. I am Sandi King.
I'm Joshua Taylor.
I am Davyrockett.
Here we go.
Boom.
That's the three of us.
That's who we
This
are.
is our pilot episode, guys.
Oh, shit.
I know.
Oh, Smurl.
Oh, smart.
We're so excited to introduce you guys to About. What the fuck is this About podcast about?
See what you did there.
Did you see? I stole it. I read that straight off my page because it was on your last transcript.
Man, what is this about? Let's see. So we are sitting in Chinchilla studio, which is our home studio here, and we always have these awesome conversations late at night when we've been drinking or after shows or, whatever.
Or like when we first wake up, when we've been drinking, or like also sometimes when
we're in the middle of the day.
When I just get back from a run that I was drinking on.
Yeah. We always sit around and just like shoot the shit about music and about the music business and our local music scene. And we thought, hey, let's do a podcast about that. We have a lot of friends in the music scene. We have a lot of colleagues in the local music scene. So we thought, hey, let's do that.
I'm not sure which of you guys coined it either, but one of you wrote down that the little line "conversations between friends in the music industry," which I like as like maybe something that becomes a tag or who knows, a subtitle or something. But conversations between friends in music. I think one thing, it sums up what the podcast is, but two, it sort of reinforces that idea that we don't want to use the word interviews or whatever. It's conversations.
Yeah.
At the heart, it's sort of as free form as it can be while being structured enough to be listenable.
Yeah, and maybe we'll cut in some weird random stuff like, the Tashi time where he goes off on some random nerdy stuff, and we'll maybe talk about Trillian because she's prancing around.
Being a bitch.
Prancing around.
Anyways. So yeah, we're planning on having, conversations between the three of us, but we'll have special guests as often as we can from the local and national music scene, depending on where we are. Because who knows, we might have to do some of these from the road when we're on tour.
Oh, yeah.
Or, interview some people, have conversations with people while we're on tour and just incorporate that. Because we meet a lot of really cool, interesting people while we're on the road. But we really want to get every side of the music, everything that has to do with music.
Yeah.
Like I have a chef friend who listens to music in the kitchen, and how that impacts his workday, or talking about, what it's like to book certain venues for our friends that book here in San Diego and stuff like that.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's every little mouse has a wee wee.
That is true.
No, it seems like we live a very unique life. I mean, I guess everybody lives a unique lifestyle, but it seems like we tend to have weird perspectives on things.
Yeah. Yeah. I as you said that, I realized that I guess we all think in terms of what our own reference point is. I was just thinking like, about speaking to specific people in my life I know who aren't in this. So it's almost like maybe part of the impetus for this is like knowing what friends and family we have who have no way of relating in a visceral sort of experiential way to what it's like to live this life. And that's sort of part of the fun and I don't want to say agenda, but it's sort of one of the things that informs the idea is that, well, let's talk about this unique perspective that,
I love the idea of catching our perspective at, like volatile times or great times, because there's no other way for somebody to grasp like, oh, we do this weird thing, but it's still work. Mm-hmm. And kind of an easy way to make that make sense would maybe be for us to record one of these home from a terrible gig or something where we're just like, man, fuck this.
Right, exactly.
I would rather be bagging groceries.
Right.
Which kind of leads into the fact that we really want to make this interactive. We're going to have on our Facebook and on the About webpage. We want to know, like, what, from other people's perspective, what you'd want to know, who we should have, what kind of questions you have about being a musician. If you are a musician or in the music field, like, do you want to come and hang out with us and have a conversation. And
basically, we just want people to come over and play with us.
This is an
That's all it is. Do you guys want to come over?
Well, so that's another thing I like about the direction we would like to go with this podcast is that we don't have the idea that certainly we might have like structured segments that traditionally you would find, so they're sort of familiar and you're like, oh, that's coming up or that's coming up. But that the context of any one podcast can be so unique to what's happening that, I think you're right. That does give people a real peek inside what it is like to. We come home from a good gig or a shitty gig or someone else's gig or something that is not a musical show, but have some perspective that we think is relevant to the podcast.
Yeah. Well, what would be really cool too, this just occurred to me, would be to get these unique insights. For example, having a sound person here. Having them just fucking vent their frustrations about, I hate it when people do I hate it when a performer does this.
Yeah.
Cool way to...
It would be great to, I mean, we are going to aim to be as honest and true to ourselves as possible. You know, for whoever is listening, the 5 people in the beginning, and whoever knows how many, you know, eventually. But the point is not to sugarcoat it, but to really talk about what it's like to live this life and to answer questions and talk about it in a real way.
Yeah, which I should mention too that I think we're certainly all positive about overall about our career and our art, and we like it. But yeah, I think there's a difference between being generally positive and communicating falsely exclusive positivity. I think we want to make sure you get everything. So, and that's kind of fun. I think another thing too, I just actually thought of this, is that it's fun to think about. You know, over the years, all the blogs or guides to this or that you read, and it's always from one person's perspective at a time. Yeah. And even as, you know, I don't know how many other musicians are going to listen to this. It may be a little grandiose to think that it might be some sort of a reference in some way, but
even
if
somebody
they do,
writing a reference or how to or whatever about anything is kind of an isolated activity.
Exactly. So
they probably aren't getting home from a shitty gig and writing a chapter.
Exactly. You know? And so what would be cool is, you know, it would be nice. I would like a podcast that myself a few years ago would get something out of listening to. Like if I could give a podcast to my starting out self, like I would like it to be informative and interesting and engaging and kind of give you a peek.
And all 3 of us have our own unique perspective within the fact that we together are now combining our efforts and creating this other unique perspective as about, you know, Davy, talk about where you came from musically.
Oh man. So I kind of grew up playing punk rock. Pretty much, really. Formed some really terrible habits. I mean, musically, vocally, whatever.
Substancely.
Yes, substancely.
Well, you are a bass player.
Right. Piercing-wise.
You're everywhere.
And then went to school for classical music. I worked for a music publishing company for a long time doing audio production, doing that whole side of things, and arranging, orchestrating, all that kind of shit. And now full-time performer in a whole bunch of different capacities and different instruments and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Josh,
that's me.
Yeah, I mean,
other story.
Yeah, I mean, musically, I grew up just liking music and being a bedroom guitar player, one of those kids that I would sit for hours and hours.
Sexy.
Yeah. I was a hobbyist for a lot of years, and I didn't do anything professionally with music until 2011. I was in the Navy. I went a totally different route. I went to the Naval Academy. I served on active duty. So that was a whole 9-year detour in my life that had nothing to do with music. But all that time I would play guitar. So I grew up, even as a young adult, being really, really eager to get out there and do music. And so my entry point into music is I don't have formal education in music, but I was very studious as a self-taught musician. I read textbooks and stuff, that kind of studious. So
I'm sure you got, at worst, your self-education was as good as the majority, probably, even of people with a bachelor's in music.
Right. Well, I mean, I'd say the same. Well, as you said that, I realized I would say the same thing about an avid. I mean, there's lots of. I majored in history as an undergrad, and the average history buff who reads on their own probably knows more about history than I do. So it is all about your dedication to it. But anyway, my leaning, my musical taste now. I mean, I'm a singer-songwriter and guitar player, and I really gravitated towards like the really technical, virtuosic, improvisational style of play. I'm not claiming to have achieved anything, but that's certainly where my ear goes. So that's kind of my take on music. And what about you, Sandy?
I was doing something totally different before I started doing music. I mean, I grew up in San Diego. My dad is a trumpet player here. He been in many jazz bands. And I grew up around that. And I was lucky enough to sing in a big band when I was like 10 or 11, and I had no idea how lucky I was. I totally took it for granted that was a part of my life. And I was like, oh yeah, well, I sing. Sure. I mean, it's really fun. I love doing it, but I didn't really think I had no idea how hard it was to get into that. And then, growing up, finding a career in, a kitchen, being a chef for a while, and then not doing that anymore, moving back to San Diego and being, submerging myself in music and just doing it now full time. With my former band 22 Kings and now with the King Taylor Project. I've been doing music now full time for almost 4 years, which it's crazy that it's been that long, but I mean, it's cool that we all three have different perspectives and come from a different place.
You actually have an extremely cool and unusual perspective as somebody that taught themselves how to book and set up tours and all that stuff. Mean, who does that?
Self-taught. I mean, I say self-taught, but I learned from reading and watching people who have done it before and then figuring out how to make that work with my life and what I was doing. So self-taught is only self-taught. There was people who paved the way, like blogs and stuff that I read.
Well, nobody's self-taught in the sense that like we're figuring out what gravity is or something,
That's a good, I'm going to write a note on that, but that's a good thing to even focus on in a future podcast is, and probably several, honestly, is like where all the things that you have to pick up on your own. And one of the things that makes this industry so unique being like all the knowledge that you have to acquire for how it works for you. We were just talking about that earlier today, but we'll revisit that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That'll probably be a whole podcast on its own.
Yeah.
You guys want to do like a nice, concise, hit the bullet points?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, you want to, so structure. Let's talk about the structure of the podcast to give listeners some expectation, right? So basically what it's a music podcast and it's about things related to music and music. So it will heavily feature background and featured segments of songs and music. So you expect to hear a lot of music in it. We don't want to just blab at you for whatever, but the overall concept is a short form, at least for now. A short form podcast, so we're hoping like under 30 minutes is kind of what we're shooting for now per show. And kind of an opening intro, what's this about, getting into it, and then we've got some segments.
Yeah, we may or may not include them in every one. But,
right.
So one of our ideas was to make drinks because, we end up sitting around a table and bullshitting and having a drink. So if we have something interesting that we've made, if I wander into the kitchen and decide to just look at what's in there and be like, I've got some carrots. I have a bottle of vodka and some beet juice and a frozen pizza. What are we going to make? I figure out how to make a drink. Maybe I make it up on the spot. I hate that
when we're all like, I'm so thirsty. I'd kill for a drink right now, but we don't have a frozen pizza.
Oh my goodness. So that'll be one of probably some podcasts will have that in it. Also, we'll definitely talk about shows that we've seen. Local shows, big shows, whatever it is. Obviously, if we've gone out and seen music, we're going to probably end up talking about it. Maybe
Try
we'll
to
even
keep it
have
honest.
Maybe we'll even have those people on the show and be able to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we can tell them it was terrible in person.
Right. Especially if it was terrible.
Gear reviews or gear talk. What's important, or are you too concerned with gear?
the newest gadget either of you guys have purchased.
Right.
And
well, and there's
been
been like a couple really, really rad little cheap purchases that we've come across.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that are like, I don't mind sharing that knowledge as long as you don't share it. I'll share it to our podcast listeners only.
And also on that note, these two, Davy and Josh, are very, I say nerdy in a really, in a great way, because it's so cool to just sit and listen to you guys talk about things I have no idea about. And I learn something every time there's a discussion.
It's so cool for me for you to sit and listen to me talk about stuff.
I know. You're sweet.
It's I worry about her lady brain, though. I do.
She might not understand.
I want to break her.
But there might be a couple segments where either of you or both of you are just going off on some crazy nerdy. Yeah.
And so another thing we're hoping to have too, obviously we'll host this in a lot of the typical syndication places. We'll have it on iTunes. We'll have it on SoundCloud. And we don't want to pin anything down right now, but we'll look around and see what are some of the most popular formats, the easiest ways for people to acquire it. And we'll have it on the About Podcast website.
Aboutpodcast.com.
Aboutpodcast.com.
Along with pictures and recipes and
videos and shenanigans and
extra content
behind the scenes.
Yeah, hopefully
even
some downloadable music that we featured in the podcast.
That'd be great.
Absolutely. And we'll be on social media with the About Podcast as well. So you'll see social feed, Instagram, Facebook, that kind of stuff. So the idea is to make it engaging and fun and interactive and have as much content for everyone to engage with as possible. Thank you guys so much for listening to the About Podcast.
I'm Sandi King.
I'm Joshua Taylor.
Are we really doing the individual sign-ups?
I'm davyrockett.
I'm Sandi King.
Nope. I'm not participating.
All right, fuck y'all. We're out.
Peace.
Music on this episode is provided by the one and only Davy Rockett.
That's his rocket noise.